So friends, in the first part of the lecture, Dr. Richa Bajaj talked about the coming up of the book, the text, the literary theory text called the Second Sex. And in this part, the central point of the book, which according to her is the independence of woman or the independent woman, that will be discussed. And that is, of course, an idea that the womankind in today's world needs, and humankind also in general does. So I request her to present the specific argument that she puts forward under the title, The Independent Woman.
Right. Thank you, Professor Prakash. So I was talking about the independent woman, right? Now there is, I actually, let me just straight away quote from the book how she begins this chapter. Why don't you look at the screen, viewers? You'll be able to see. We'll discuss this. Have a look at the screen. Now this is a quote from the Independent Woman, chapter 14, from the Second Sex, and she says, and I quote, it's a long quote, so bear with me. French law no longer includes obedience among a wife's duties, and every woman citizen has become a voter. These civic liberties remain abstract if there is no corresponding economic autonomy. The kept woman, wife or mistress, is not freed from the male just because she has a ballot paper in her hands. While today's customs impose fewer constraints on her than in the past, such negative licenses have not fundamentally changed her situation. She remains a vassal, imprisoned in her condition. It is through work that woman has been able, to a large extent, to close the gap separating her from the male. Work alone can guarantee her concrete freedom. The system based on her dependence collapses as soon as she ceases to be a parasite. There is no longer need for a masculine mediator between her and the universe. End quote. This is how the chapter begins. Now, if you would have noticed that she has obviously emphasized the very need of women to work, right? That she says work alone can guarantee a concrete freedom for women, and that a ballot paper is not the only thing that can get her her rights, that she is a vassal. Very importantly, she keeps using this term often in the text, that she's a vassal who's imprisoned in her condition. That means she's a slave, right? And if you notice that she says that a woman who's a kept woman, now kept in the category of kept woman, if you would have noticed, she's clubbed both the wife and the mistress. So the kept woman is both wife and mistress because she's not free from the male or the male ideas, both, unless when she refuses or when she ceases to be a slave, when she's able to win for her place her economic autonomy, it is then and only then that a kind of a new path can be opened, right? So that is the first precondition. So when she enters this when she begins this chapter, the independent woman, she is already foregrounded the value of work, of economic autonomy in women, and that only can be the path to freedom. In fact, she mentions in this chapter that the free woman is just being born, is just hasn't even taken shape yet. So the free woman is just being born because work is something that has newly come into their lives. Then she goes into this idea of, there are two things that I would like to focus on. One, that she says that, women stop at just getting their rights and they say that we've won our right for freedom and we've become free, we've become equal, and that's it. She says that women stop short at that very point when they should be exploring, which she says that truth has so many layers and truth is itself so ambiguous that there are no clear-cut categories and there is no sort of a kind of a right and wrong sort of a thing. And therefore, she says that it's just not enough for women to stop at the point that, oh, they've won freedom, oh, they've won economic autonomy. They must go forward and understand the ambiguities that exist in that situation as well. The second thing that she focuses here is, is the life of an independent woman, so to speak. What are the problems that she goes through, right? And this is when she says that, and I quote from the text again. She says that the condition, the complexity of their reality, the working woman. She says that, and I quote, "Without a doubt, they, that is women, are economically independent only within an economically oppressed class. So they are economically independent only within an economically oppressed class, that there is a larger reality around them which is of economic dependence of an entire class on another class. So, you know, how she broadens the feminist perspective to include the Marxist one, how she is moving in the direction of talking about class fights, of class oppression, that, you know, it's not enough for women to just gain economic independence, because finally once they get economic independence they join the rut of another fight, which is the class fight, where men and women both are in the factory, you know, spending good number of hours at work and unable to get any freedom of a real kind. So even when women may have been able to break the barrier of fight of gaining equality with men, they find themselves in a class system which is deeply fractured and which is sharply divided in that sense. So and she goes forward, and then she adds this another kind of a space of double sort of a marginalization, you could call it, and I return to the same quote where she says, without a doubt they are economically independent only within an economically oppressed class, and besides, tasks carried out in a factory do not free them from household chores. So do you see this kind of a double sort of a fix or a double whammy in their case, that on one hand they join the oppressed economic class of workers, and when they come home they have not been freed from their household chores. They must do both, and the result is that they are overwhelmed and that they are exhausted and that they are aggressive and that they are confused, and this kind of a, so this is not just a kind of a physical exhaustion, but there is a kind of a mental trauma that women go through as well. And she says that most of these problems and illnesses that women face, the cause of it is this kind of psychic sort of trauma that they go through, because they are always falling short of being the ideal woman that they have been destined to be by their mothers and their you know, elders. They have been destined to be. They feel that they are not doing the right job properly if they cannot manage the house, and of course because they have chosen. So you know what Simone de Beauvoir does in this particular chapter is to talk about the personal life chosen by the woman and the destiny that she was prepared for. And she says that the woman, the working woman, is constantly torn in between these two, her personal choice to work and the destiny that she was supposed to follow. So she can't just throw it out of the window, she can't just discard it. She keeps carrying that load with her even when she has joined the workforce. So what, as a result, she's not as free as the man is, who might go after work to a restaurant to have a meal. She says no, she must go back and scrub her floor and make sure she has a home cooked meal, because that's what she has been taught by her mother. So you know, there is this kind of a double oppression that she goes through, because she is working in the factory and also managing the household chores, right? And she goes forward, and I'm taking another quote from the same chapter, and I quote, "It seems natural to the man that she run the house and oversee the care and raising of the children alone. The woman herself believes that her personal life," now her personal life is the work life, "the woman herself believes that her personal life does not dispense her from the duties she assumed in marrying. She does not want her husband to be deprived of the advantages he would have had in marrying a, so to speak, a real girl or a real woman. She wants to be elegant, a good housekeeper, a devoted mother, as wives traditionally are. It is a task that easily becomes overwhelming. She assumes it out of both consideration for the partner and fidelity to herself." You see, in this particular chapter, she talks about this kind of psychological confinement of women as well, that you know, it is a kind of a consciousness that she has developed over a period of time that has been given by society to her, where she thinks that she is not being loyal to herself if she is not doing the work that she was prepared to do by her mothers and by society. So there is on one hand public opinion that is constantly pinning her down, but on the other hand she is fixed. There is a kind of a fixation that she has grown up with, that she can't fight, which is a part of her mind, which is a part of her mental processes, that she thinks that she is not, it is a fidelity to herself then to be a housekeeper. a good housekeeper. And I take the quote forward, for she insists, as we have seen, on fulfilling every aspect of her destiny as woman. So that destiny point she takes up in the first volume, which she connects in the second volume in this chapter. So in this chapter is in a way the penultimate chapter, of course, of the book, because this leads to the conclusion. So she insists, as we have seen, on fulfilling every aspect of her destiny as woman, split between the desire to affirm herself and self-effacement. She is divided and torn. So society has taught her taught her self-effacement, but she has desired and wanted to affirm herself. So in affirming herself, she has not left, or she has not been able to discard what society taught her, that is the value of self-effacement, the value of sacrifice, the value of pedestalizing the male or believing in male superiority. Finally, this working woman, this independent woman, has to fight with her own self as she is left divided and torn. So most working women, according to Simone de Beauvoir, escape the traditional feminine world. Neither society nor their husbands give them their need to become, in concrete terms, equal to men. And then she adds this very interesting point. She says, only women with political convictions, active in trade unions, who are confident in their future, can give an ethical meaning to this thankless daily labor. But as women deprived of leisure time and inheriting a tradition of submissiveness, it is understandable that women are just beginning to develop their political and social awareness. So, they are just beginning to develop their political and social awareness. And so, the point being that unless they moved in the direction of political and social awareness, unless they become politically active, they will not be able to discard the values that have been imposed on them, that have confined them. So, and this is again another important point that she keeps returning to in the essay, which is, for a woman to accomplish her femininity, she is required to be object and prey. That is, she must renounce her claims as a sovereign subject. And she takes this up in her discussion on sexuality, where she says that for the man, it has to be that the woman is conquered. She cannot, if the woman cannot become the sovereign subject and cannot become the desiring subject, she must become the object and the prey, and that is when she accomplishes her femininity. So in fact, Simone de Beauvoir in this essay offers a very stark, sort of a very sharp critique of the idea of femininity. Because the idea of femininity means that a woman must become an object and prey, and a passive object, an undesiring object who is conquered, and the man finally has within quotes, right? So she cannot assume the part of the sovereign subject. But the woman who has emancipated herself, right, and this is, she says, the singular characteristic of the situation of the emancipated woman, she refuses to confine herself to the role of a female, because she does not want to mutilate herself, because she does not want to be the object and the prey. Therefore, she doesn't, so the emancipated woman does not want to confine herself to the role of a female, because she does not want to mutilate herself. But it would also be a mutilation to repudiate her sex. So this is the double bind that she comes to, that what should a woman do? Should she discard her woman self? Because discarding her woman self would mean discarding part of her humanity. She says man is a sexed human being. Woman is a complete individual and equal to the male only if she too is a sexed human being. Renouncing her femininity means renouncing part of her humanity. So the point is that what should an emancipated woman do? Should she discard her femininity? She says, but that would mean that a man is a sexed being. There is a sense of male attributes attached to it. Just as the woman is a woman and has her body which tells her that she is a woman, should she discard her woman self? She says no, she should not discard her woman self, but she should definitely discard the woman that society has made for her, that society wants her to adapt, that society wants her to be, which is the woman in confinement, which is the object, which is the passive object, which is the prey and the the conquered object. So a woman must not in that sense discard herself and doesn't have to become a neutral sort of a being. She should be a woman, but a woman who can find a place in her life. Again, she says that women are mostly, they are doomed to a state of passivity in their relationship with men, because custom in a way is male centered. They don't allow women the space of an active individual, right? And the whole idea that the woman is distinguished on the basis of her appearance. She is judged, she is respected or desired. Now, what kind of a woman does she want to be in society is also determined by how she looks, whether she wants to be judged and respected, whether she wants to be desired. And she goes into these ideas, various ideas that have been offered. She goes into the idea of a kept woman. She goes into the idea of a woman who thinks it easy to live by becoming the kept woman, and then she lives in a delusion. She seems to live in a delusion that she's not dependent, because then cynicism helps her. But then she says the fight for an emancipated, independent woman becomes double fold, because she's fighting in a male's world, and she can already see that her counterpart has probably married off and is living as a kept woman. Maybe that was a better choice. So there is a kind of dilemma that at each point a woman faces. And so she says that tradition demands her to keep her house ready, tradition demands her to be upright, tradition demands her to look fascinating, to seduce. She says that, so if she's not doing all of that, then what does she become? Does she become a male? So she says, but in becoming the male, the woman actually then lets go or denounces her womanly self. So, the choice that society gives you for a working woman is to be then leave everything. Don't be the fascinating woman, etc. Become the male. But she says becoming the male can't be the answer. Becoming a woman in her own right has to be the real answer in her sense. So, it's the complexity that actually takes you and that is insightful at each level. It's not something that there is a ready answer. It might also look confusing, because, she's constantly talking about different types of women and talking about public opinion that is constantly weighing heavy on women. So she says at one point in this chapter, and I quote, "However, public opinion is not the only concern that makes her devote so much time and care to her looks and home. She wants to feel like a real woman for her own personal satisfaction. She only succeeds in accepting herself from the perspective of both the past and the present by combining the life she has made for herself and the destiny prepared for her by her mother for her childhood games and her adolescent fantasies." This is a very important point, really speaking, because she's saying there is a present that the woman is trying to change by combat, by fighting, by resilience, but there is a past which is not changed. In 1949, this is the important point, that the past still has been the climate that she grew up in. The past is still the climate where she was given these childhood games of dolls, of beauty, of other things. In her adolescent years, she was given fantasies where she would offer herself to a male and be ready when the male is, she goes into the cultural metaphors of deflowering, or of virginity. So there is this idea of adolescent fantasies that she has grown up with, which is a part of her past life. There are childhood games that have prepared her to become the bride or to become the offering for the male. There are these mother's stories or mother's preparations that she has gone through. So that past is still with her. So the present doesn't change unless that past changes. And which is why she makes this very important point that the climate for young girls have to change. The growing up years have to change for the present to be, for the woman in the present to be able to change her situation. By changing her life in the present, she cannot completely negate that past that she has lived. It keeps returning to her. It keeps oppressing her. Does it make sense to you? So, so she's unable to come out of that kind of that inferiority complex. And she says at one point that the independent woman, in fact, and I'm quoting here, look at this quote, "The independent woman, especially the intellectual who thinks through her situation, will suffer from an inferiority complex as a female." What does she mean by inferiority complex as a female? because she doesn't have time for beauty and care. She's not seductive, she's not spontaneous. She spends a good amount of time on this idea that even when she wants to seduce, even when this independent intellectual woman tries to take on the idea of a female or femininity that society has given her, right, she's not able to be that person, because she's not as vacuous. She's not the spontaneous offered prey. That is Simone de Beauvoir's term. She cannot become the spontaneous offered prey, because the intellectual woman knows that she is offering herself and she is a conscious subject. And because she is a conscious subject, she cannot become the spontaneous prey. So even when she suffers, the independent woman may suffer for a period of time from this inferiority complex as a female, because she is not the beauty, she is not the spontaneous flower and ready to please man, because she is in a position of power, and that in a way keeps also returning to her. And unless she rediscovers herself as a woman, she will be obsessed by these ideas of femininity. And she says again that if men were content to love a peer instead of a slave, women would be far less obsessed with their femininity. That if women, it's not just that women and culture, but the culture also needs to teach men that sees women as slave, to see women as peers. Once women are seen as peers, she says, in their growing up years, it is then that they would look at women not as slaves but as peers. And once they do that, then women would also not be so obsessed with their femininity, and they would learn to rediscover themselves. So here I come to some of the main points of the essay here, and particularly what I mean to say, this chapter from the second sex. So the feminine woman is seen as a passive prey, and the man is seen as the carnal man. She must become a passive thing, a promise of submission for the man. And according to public opinion, it is the man who conquers, who has the woman. It does not accept that she can, like the man, assume her desires. She is their prey. So you see, the prey and the hunt sort of metaphor keeps running along in this chapter, along with the idea of the passive thing, the carnal man, so to speak. And it is understood that the male has integrated the forces of species into his individuality, whereas the woman is the slave of the species. This seems to be the main point of her thesis, that the woman is considered in society and in public opinion the slave of the species, and man, so to speak, is the species. So therefore she becomes the male attribute, the male identity is one with human species, and the female is seen as the slave of the species, which is why she is unable to get her due. And at one point she says, therefore women need to come out and join the life of politics and society, because unless they do that, they will occupy the life of a marginal life. And she says it is very difficult to change the world that you want to live in if you are going to be in the margins. So women must come to the center is also one of her main points in the essay. And it is only when the idea of defeat and victory are abolished, she says, that the act of love becomes a free exchange. So because it is always about the hunt and the hunted, defeat and victory, the hunter and the prey, right, the passive and the active agent, unless these categories are demolished and abolished, she says that the act of love or equality of the real kind wouldn't be possible. What do you think? I can go on and on, but I would like to take your...
Towards the end, you use the passive sentence, are abolished, etc.
Right.
So, who would abolish them? Of course, women.
Of course, women.
So she would say then, perhaps, that women have to become active. You said combat in the previous discussion. So, she has to be combative, and she has to defeat this kind of negative tendency that exists in society.
Right.
And the question that I want to pose to you, and through you to the argument that she has given, she has not mentioned the word socialist woman ever, I think, in the book. What do you think is the socialist woman? Is there a category called the socialist woman? Because she is talking about the bourgeois woman. She is working. She is working in a society which itself is class divided. She belongs to a class which is oppressed as a whole, of which she is a part.
Right.
So I think the answer perhaps lies in attaining through active effort a true kind of socialism which may be missing in the world, but which is to be revived and brought back.
So she is certainly talking about the middle class woman, who is gaining a foothold in society, who has gained some sort of education and is now entering the world of the market. She's becoming a workforce, joining the workforce. So certainly her position is, and this is again, as I said at the outset, that she's not talking about the working class woman in that sense, but she is certainly talking about a new consciousness that is emerging through the middle class woman, and she is certainly talking about the position of women from that middle class sphere, whether it is marriage, whether it is any kind of license with men, or any kind of a social activity that she may be a part of. So certainly the approach is from the middle class angle, but she is not talking about a woman who has entered the bourgeois world, because she also sees the bourgeois world as working actively through women and including them. The moment, in fact, it's very interesting that she combines the bourgeois world with matrimony, with patriarchy. And she says at one point that the moment a girl becomes a kept woman, whether she as a wife or as a mistress, she says, in that moment she has adhered to not only the patriarchal norms but also the bourgeois norms of society. It is only when the woman remains independent and conscious and aware and politically and socially aware that she can first evolve or understand herself. You see, this is also the point of understanding the free woman. She says the woman should fight for the rights for her rights, but before fighting she should know who she is. Till this point she doesn't even know who she is, and she seems to be torn in these kind of dilemmas that keep working on her and keep her unsure of her future, of the choices and the temptations that the middle class woman has, right? And these temptations leave her torn and also confused. So the first step is for such a woman to find answers for herself and find her own self before she can begin to take charge of the world that she wants to change. So certainly she's not talking about the working class woman, but she's talking about, but she's aware of the enemy, so to speak, because she in a way combines the bourgeois world with that of patriarchy, and how the male viewpoint becomes active and pertinent through and the bourgeois viewpoint becomes active, and they combine in that logic.
So friends, it's a very provocative conclusion that Dr. Bajaj has presented. The provocative part is that a woman enters the world as a world dominated by the middle class, and that there are problems there. And these problems can be solved not by individual women, whether it's Simone de Beauvoir or others, but then there is definitely a very sharp question to be faced by all of us. Thank you.